I have stayed in Asian country, particularly Pakistan, Philippines, and India, and some parts of Asia, Bangladesh, and also have many friends in those countries, and I have many families that have interacted with them equally to understand what their culture is. And there is something that today I would like to talk about. Now, that is about blood, honor, and a lie that has lasted centuries. And not anyone dares to question this. It is a test that happens every night of a wedding of a woman. This test does not happen in a laboratory. It does not even happen in a courtroom. It happens in a bedroom on a wedding night where a young woman is being judged quietly, completely by whether or not she bleeds. Verdict passed by a husband and a mother-in-law can follow the lady and the family for the rest of her life. Now, here is what nobody in that courtroom knows. The test is scientifically invalid. It has always been scientifically invalid. And the institutions that should have said loudly, such as the religious institution, the government institution, and the different cultural institutions in these countries, have stayed quiet for quite many years or decades. Now, that silence is exactly what we are investigating today. Before we go any further, let me be precise about what I am actually talking about, because vague language is one of the primary ways harmful practices survive unchallenged. The belief is this: a woman's virginity can be confirmed by whether or not she bleeds during the first intercourse in that night. The assumption underneath that belief is that an intact hymen causes bleeding, and the absence of bleeding signals prior sexual activity of that lady. This expectation is not limited to one country or one religion. It has been there for centuries. It is widespread across South Asia, parts of the Middle East, North Africa, and within diaspora community living in the West. It shapes wedding nights, it ends marriages, and in documented cases across multiple countries, it has ended lives. And yet, by every credible measures of modern medical science, it is false, not contested, not a matter of ongoing debate, but just false. So let's look at the evidence, because this is where the conversion has to be grounded. In 2018, the British Medical Journal published a clinical review of the existing literature on the hymen and the virginity testing. The conclusion reached by the researchers was ambiguous. There is no reliable way to determine virginity through physical examination. Actually, none. Here is why. The hymen is not a seal. It is a thin layer, elastic membrane that varies significantly in shape, size, and thickness from person to person. It can stretch, thin, or remain largely unchanged through intercourse. It can be altered by physical activity, routine medical examination, or simply by normal biological development over time. Studies published in the BMJ and the Lancet have confirmed that up to half of women experience no bleeding at all during the first intercourse. Moving beyond that single study, the World Health Organization states clearly that virginity testing has no scientific validity. FIGO, the International Federation of Gynecology and Obstetrics, goes further, clarifying it as a violation of human rights. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists confirms that no anatomical finding can prove or disprove virginity. Now, it is important to understand what these organizations represent. These are not activist groups. These are not fringe voices. These are professional bodies that train the doctors trusted to deliver your children, perform your surgeries, and make life or death decisions about your health. When institutions of that caliber speaks with this level of consensus, the burden of proof shifts. It shifts entirely onto anyone who is still defending this practice. With that evidence established, let's return to what this belief actually produces in real lives, because data without consequence is easy to dismiss. Human Rights Watch has documented cases across South Asia where women were accused, divorced, or subjected to violence on their wedding night, based solely on the absence of bleeding. United Nations report on gender-based violence consistently identify virginity testing as a harmful practice that produces lasting psychological damage. On that same human rights frameworks clarify as a form of sexual violence. In Pakistan specifically, the consequences are well documented. They include public accusation and humiliation by the husband's family on the wedding night itself. They include forced gynecological examination conducted without the woman's informed consent. They include divorce within hours of a marriage that took years to arrange. They include permanent social stigma that does not stay with the woman alone. It spreads to her parents, her siblings, and every family member connected to her name. And in documented extreme cases, they include honor-based violence and killing, a practice that consistently produces these outcomes at the very moment a wedding begins cannot be defended as protective. It is destructive by design, because the design was never built around the woman's well-being. It was built around control. Which brings us to the question that actually needs answering. How did this belief survive for a long time? To understand that, we have to follow the history honestly. In a pre-modern agricultural and feudal society across Asia and the Middle East, marriage was not primarily a romantic arrangement. It was an economic and political one. Land, property, and inheritance passed through family line. Paternity carried legal weight, and without that benefit of modern science, certainly about lineage depended, at least in the mind of those in power, on controlling women's sexuality before and within marriage. As a result, virginity became a form of social currency, not because women's experiences mattered in that equation, but because male inheritance structures required a system of visible proof. Over time, that economic logic hardened into cultural expectation. That cultural expectation then attached itself to religious language in order to gain legitimacy. And that religious language was passed down through generations as though it were divine instruction, when in most cases it is not. That is the architecture of the lie that I'm talking about. An economic system produced a cultural norm. A cultural norm borrowed religious clothing, and the religious clothing made it nearly impossible to question. That brings us directly to the religion question, and I want to address it head on because it will come up. In Islam, the Quran does not establish virginity testing. It does not reference the hymen. It does not prescribe any physical examination of a woman's body upon marriage. That is simply not in the text. What the Quran does address and addresses repeatedly is the grave danger of accusation without evidence. Surah An-Nur verses 4 prescribes serious consequences for those who accuse chaste women without producing sufficient proof. The evidentiary standard is classical Islamic jurisprudence is extraordinarily high, and it was made that way deliberately to protect individuals from precisely the kind of public humiliation that this practice routinely produces. Furthermore, scholars at Al-Azhar University one of the oldest and the most respected institutions of Islamic scholarship in the world, have issued formal statements declaring virginity testing to be without textual foundation and harmful to women. Multiple fiqh councils across different legal traditions have reached the same conclusion independently. So when someone says this practice is rooted in religion, it is worth being precise. What they are almost always defending is their culture. And that is a meaningful distinction, because while scripture is fixed, culture is not. Culture changes. It has already changed in ways that once seemed unthinkable. Child marriage was cultural. Denying women access to education was cultural. Medical taboos around women's health were cultural. Each of these shifted when evidence and conscience were brought to bear together. This is the next one. Now, there is a predictable objection that came up every time this conversation is had. So let's address them directly. The first objection is this: if we remove this expectation, morality will collapse. This is the first deception that most people say. That argument assumes that fear is what holds moral behavior in place, but the sociological evidence points in the opposite direction entirely. Communities with open sexual health education, honest family communication, and a trust-based norm consistently demonstrate lower rate of harmful behavior, not higher. Fear does not build morality. Fear builds secrecy, and secrecy creates precisely the condition in which harm is most likely to occur unseen. The second objection that most people bring up is this: that this is our tradition, but longevity has never been a defense or correctness. Foot binding lasted for nearly 1,000 years. Widow burning was practiced for centuries. The denial of women's legal personhood was standard across most of the world until relatively recently. Every one of those practices was eventually abandoned, not because they lost their age, but because communities chose evidence and conscience over inherited habit. Duration is not justification. So with all of that said, what does culturally respectable reform actually look like? To begin with, medical professionals need to speak publicly in a community language, in Urdu, in Punjabi, in Bengali, in Arabic, about what the hymen is and what it is not. This information already exists in English language medical journals. The gap is not in the research. The gap is in the conversation that happens inside families. Beyond that, faith leaders who have already drawn a clear line between Quranic ethics and cultural inheritance need to be amplified rather than silenced. The scholarly work has been done. What is needed now is for it to reach the people who most need to hear it. And finally, families need to be willing to redefine what honor actually means. Honor that is built on a woman's anatomy is not honor. It is controlled with a more acceptable name. True dignity for a family, for a marriage, for a community comes from how people treat one another, not from what a body does or does not prove. Let me close with this. This is not a conversation about whether tradition value matter. They can or do. This is a conversation about whether a specific belief, especially a belief that a woman should be virgin before marriage, one with no scientific basis, no solid religious foundation, and a well-documented record of destroying lives at their most vulnerable moment, deserve to continue. The evidence has spoken. The scholars have spoken. The women who have lived through this have spoken. The only question that remains is whether we are willing to say so out loud in our homes, in our communities, in the spaces where young women are still walking into wedding nights, carrying fear that was never theirs to carry. Truth, when spoken clearly and consistently enough, loses its power to harm. Share this, not to shame anyone, but because someone in your cycle may need to hear what you just heard. I'm a realistic thinker, and I invite you to think critically, to question whatever thing that you have been asked. Until then, live honestly.